cats and kittens, this is Alex. I am your crochet fiberist. Please prepare to fiber. Hi guys, this is episode 9A and this is another installment of Rediscovered Stitches, and we're in the Trinity Stitches section and we're finishing our Berrily cowl. I hope you've had a chance to download that. If you are curious as to how to get a hold of that pattern, which is quite lovely if I do say so myself, I have a code in episode 7A that if you jot that down and put that in your Ravelry, okay, so hop on Ravelry, go to Crochet, find the pattern title, click on it, click to buy, the coupon code, slap in the coupon code, and you will have it for free. And I believe I'm doing that until the day after Thanksgiving, or maybe the Monday after Thanksgiving. So if you want to get a hold of that, it's totally free. It's just it's just a gift from me to you to thank you for watching the show. So if you get a chance, please take care of that. If you've already done that, yay you. And hopefully you can join me with your project and you'll be ready to get started on the modified modified shell stitch, which is what we're cross-shelled stitch, which is what we're going to be doing now. Okay, so if you are working on a small version of the Berrily cowl, you will have done 4 rows of our lovely Trinity stitch. If you're doing the large version like I am, you've done 6 rows, and you'll notice that your project will have you will notice that there are divots and then there's kind of like a peak in the stitches now. So here's an example. Here is my first row of the Trinity stitch, and I've got this really decently sized stitch. I've got a teeny tiny peak stitch right there, and then another regular size stitch. Now that is something you're going to want to keep in mind as we work through this first row, which is setting up our crossed shell stitches. So grab your pattern. I'm going to grab mine and we'll get started, huh? Okay. Whoa. Give me a second, cats, kittens, etc. Alrighty. Okay, sorry. Where were we? Okay, so grab your pattern and take a look. So what we're going to do is chain 3. 1, 2, 3. And we are going to skip 2 stitches. So we're going to skip that regular stitch. We're going to skip that peak stitch, and we're going to start our first stitches on this 3rd stitch. And that's very, very important because we're doing 1 set of stitches, and then we're going to cross back to the first stitch and work some stitches there. Okay, so in that 3rd stitch we are going to work 3 double crochets. I'm calling them interchangeably shells or not, but the idea is you're working 3 double crochets into this stitch. All right, then what we're going to do is chain 3s. So we chain 3, and then we're going to go back to that first stitch we skipped, and we are going to create a 3 double crochets into that stitch. So yarn over, go through that first stitch, yarn over, create your double crochet. Now your double crochet is going to essentially cross over that pair of stitches you did first. So let me finish doing that twice so you can see what's going on there. And that is entirely what you want. So give me a second. Woot. Oh, for Pete's sake. It's kind of unwieldy and it'll take you a little time to get used to the stitches, but once you understand what's going on, it's going to make sense. So here we are. We have 2 sets of shells, but one shell is kind of sitting on top, like completely wrapped around the other set of shells. And that's what you want to see, okay? And on either side, you can almost see like the Trinity stitch growing, like down here, growing into the shell stitches. That's kind of how I was thinking of how it was working itself out. So once you've completed that, you have done your first cross-shelled stitch, modified cross-shell stitch. So what do we do next? Where do we go from here? Well, we're going to repeat this process all the way around. So you're going to want to skip 3 stitches this time. So a peak, a valley, another peak, and then we're going to work 3 double crochets and one of those what I call valley stitches. Okay. Okay. So you're going to do that. Chain 3 like we did last time. And then we are going straight across, going straight to that second stitch we skipped. And we are going to insert our hook. All right. And then we're going to create a double crochet, and then you're going to work 2 more double crochets. And essentially what you're doing is just crossing these shells. It's very, very self-explanatory, but it does take a little time to get used to. So the first time you were skipping 2 stitches. The second time you're skipping, the times after that you're going to be skipping 3 stitches and working into the second skip stitch. Okay, so that's what they look like. And let's go through this again because it's not, I don't want to say it's not intuitive, but I will say that it's a little different than perhaps a stitch you've seen before. This is, I don't want to say it's a popular stitch, but it is a stitch that exists in the universe. I just modified it a smidge to work for this particular pattern. So here we go. We're skipping 3, 1, 2, 3. So that's peak, valley, peak. Work your 3 double, wow, I am super handy today. Your 3 double crochets. Chain 3. Turn, well, you're not turning, but work backwards to the second skip stitch and yarn over, insert front to back. That's the other thing. I've seen some people try to insert back to front, and that's not what you want to do. Not only is that kind of complicated, it's not going to help. It's going to look a little weird, but it's almost like you're taking these double crochets and you're kind of leaning them to the side, and that's how I do it. It helps me to kind of see, oh, it's going to lean this way, and I'm going to insert my hook into that second skip stitch, and it's easy to bring your yarn around and construct your double crochet. 2, 3. And after the second cross stitch, you're going to see repeat pattern. Now, repeat pattern means to go to the starred spaces, which starts with the skipped 3, work your 3 DC shell, go to second skipped stitch, work or chain, sorry. So when I say repeat the pattern, it's the skip 3 stitches, insert, create your 3 shells, chain 3, go back to the second skip stitch, work your shells. That's that whole pattern repeat is what you're going to do. You're going to follow that process until you get to the end of the row. So let's get to the end of the row and then we can talk about what happens next, because you will see a giant, you'll see something in giant block letters that says turn, and there's a method to my madness, I promise, even if it's a little wonky. So I'm finding that this might be an issue because, you know what, we're going to fast forward through this and then you can see what this first unusual row looks like, okay? Thanks to the power of splicing, you will see what a full row of these cross shells look like. So here we go. I'll try to make it a little clearer for you guys. I want you to see. So let me start from the beginning. Maybe it'll be easier to see. So here's where we started, and these are all my shells. See? They're just sitting happy together. And the interesting thing about this shell is that it's a reversible pattern. So on one side, the shells are facing this way. And when you look on the other side, the shells are facing this way. And if you're following along logically, you will see why I wanted you to turn every row, every one of these cross shell stitch rows, because like I said, they're very directional and thus will make for a really interesting aesthete. But we are at the last repeat. Depending on where you are in your project, you will have hit your last repeat and you will have a couple of stitches. I'm counting 1, 2, 3, but you don't have enough to complete another cross-shelled stitch pattern, which is fine. That's okay. So here's what it looks like before we do anything. So what I'm going to ask you to do is just grab that. After you finish your last cross shell stitch repeat, I want you to go and insert your hook through the second chain of your chain 3 at the beginning of the row, and then just work a slip stitch, right? See if I can do that without making a mess. All right, Zutalo, you've made your you've closed it, right? Now you're going, it doesn't look right. That's okay. It doesn't need to look perfect yet. We're not there yet, okay? So what was that again? You create your slip stitch to close around. Now, you're going to, I think I put it in capital block letters, turn, because that's what you're going to do. Okay, so turn like you would normally turn, and then I want you to chain 3. 1, 2, 3. Now, you are facing who was it? Somebody in Craftsy has a class where she talks about the public side of a work and a private side. And I like that a lot better than the right side and the wrong side. So you're going to turn your entire work so the private side is facing you. Okay? You can tell that you're on the right side when you don't see those grid-like stitches that are your Trinity stitch. What I'm kind of seeing and what's coming to mind with me looking at this is it's kind of like slip stitches, like rows and rows of slip stitches. That's what it looks like to me, right? Okay, so what we're going to do is chain 3, and we're going to work 2 more, is it 2 more? Oh, sorry. We're going to work 3, we're going to work 3 double crochets into this stitch, this first stitch, okay? So we're making another shell. 2, 3. And then we are going to skip this entire shell, okay? So that's 3 stitches right there. We're going to skip that entire shell, and then we're just going to insert into this space, right? Into this loop, and we're going to create a single crochet. Now, I like calling it a loop so you can identify the way it works. It's really a space, but since I'm thinking of this from a visual perspective, that knowing that you're looking at a loop and that's where you're going to do your single crochet is going to come very handy as you're working the row going back this way. So let's try this again. So we've worked our 3 double crochets, we've skipped a shell, and we've inserted our single stitch in the loop. Not in the stitches, just in the loop. What we're going to do is now you should be seeing something a little familiar. You should be seeing 2 shells, and they're kind of facing each other. And what I want you to do is find the second of the 3 stitches on the second shell, right there, right? Yeah. So what we're going to do is work 3 double crochets into that. So the middle stitch of your second shell, we're going to work 3 crochets, 3 double crochets, like so. Hopefully you can see that. I'm always having a hard time seeing what you guys can see, but so we're working 3 double crochets on top of this shell stitch, right? And then we're going to chain 3. So let me go back. My pattern says skip to second of 2 presented shells. So that's what I meant by skipping to your second of the 2 presented shells. And you're working 3 double crochets in the second stitch of the shell. We're chaining 3, and then we're going to do 3 stitches in the second stitch of the first skipped shell. So here's the first skipped shell, this is the second stitch. So we're going to do that same thing we were doing last time, yarning over and kind of building your double crochet on top of that shell. And you'll notice that your stitches kind of lean naturally that way. And that's because the first row, your stitches worked like this. So when you get to a set of stitches, they're already kind of pointed in a direction that's going to be easy to work from. So then you'd work on these, and then you'd work on these. I wish I could figure out an animation for that. I totally should. So after you work those 3 double crochets in the first skipped shell, you're going to have something that looks a lot like the first row. And then what we're going to do is single crochet in the loop, in the chain 3 loop. All right? Now, we are going to repeat this process all the way around. So, I'm going to use the power of internets and computerisms to show you what it looks like when we get to the end of the row. Okay? Okay, so I'm at the end of my second round, and I'm just at where you make your last few stitches. Let me show you. I want to make sure you guys see what I'm talking about, so it's really, really clear. All right. So remember, I'm working this way, and this is the last set of stitches before I work the slip stitch. There's a space here. What we're going to do is do 3 double crochets in this last stitch, and then we're going to slip stitch here, and then we're going to make another turn. So give me a second. So because you can't really create another cross stitch, which is that's the natural stopping point wherever you are in this project. In the first version, in the small version, I think you do end on a loop like this, maybe, or you end with on a loop, and then you do a slip stitch. I think. I'm gonna have to go back and check. If I'm wrong, just follow what we're doing here, because the rule of thumb, at least in this project, and from a logical perspective, would be wherever you can't do another set of those modified crossed shell stitches, you're in it, and most of the time, and if you're doing it right, that should happen on the last stitch or so. So I did my single crochet on the loop of the last cross stitch, and then I'm going to work 3 double crochets in my last stitch. All right, and then I am going to slip stitch into that chain 3, and then, so there you go. Hopefully you can see that. And then I'm going to magically turn. And we are back on the right side. Now, if you're doing the small version, I believe it's just these 2. Wait, you know what? I believe it's these 2, I think. If you're doing the large version, or if you're manipulating this in other ways, you want to do more repeats, or you like the bobbles, you like the cross shells, this row is going to be a little bit different, because the first thing you're going to do is half double crochet in the first row, in the first stitch, and that's the stitch that you grew out your, you're not chaining 3 here. Actually, sorry, let me get the pattern. Sometimes I just kind of follow something and I'm not always paying attention. Let's see. No, you're chaining 3. 2, 3. And then you're going to do that same pattern. We have 2 make sure you have 2 shells facing each other, and you're going to repeat the process that we've been discussing for the last 2 rows. So I pick the middle stitch of the second shells pattern and work 3 double crochets like so. And then chain 3, 1, 2, 3, and then go back to the first skipped shells and work 3 double crochets in the middle stitch of that shell. Okay, 2, 3. Sorry, it does take a little time. So you do that. You've got another one of these shells, and you will notice that the shells are working this way, one row's heading this way, one row's heading this way, and that third row is heading that way. And that's how you get the shifting nature of those cross shells. So you know what to do. You're essentially following the I'm doing this as the large stitch, so I'm essentially going back to row 8 and following that. And that is kind of what you want to do all the way around. And when you get to the end of the row, you're going to do the slip stitch, and that is going to lead you to the last little manipulation that you're going to have to know to get yourself almost done with this project. So I'm going to finish this row and show you, or finish the rows that I want to do. And then I'm going to show you the last step before you start the edging of your work. The last step is essentially creating a pattern where you're building kind of like a bridge over all of your shells to kind of create a flat surface to build more Trinity stitches and start that pattern on the way for the last 6 rows or the last 4 rows, depending on what you're working on. So give me a second. The magic of computerization will manifest itself, and then we will do this very, very last step. Okay? Awesome. Okay, cats and kittens, we're finally at the last section of our project before we go back into the Trinity stitch for either 4 rows or 6 rows, depending on how which size you decided to make your project. So let me show you. Here I am. I've done the requisite amount of rows, and as you can see, the shells are working themselves in opposite sides, or pointing in opposite directions every other row because of our trick of turning in the round. So I hope you guys got the hang of it. It takes a little while. I find that for me as the designer, it took me about 3 hours to go through that whole section of crossed shells. But your mileage may vary. It does take a little time for your hands to kind of, the facility of your hands to start understanding what's going on. But once you do, it's interesting. It's fun to see the progression. So one last time, here we are. And now you'll notice that we have jagged edges. And we kind of need to level the plane, as it were, before we end with our rows and rows of Trinity stitch. So here's how we do it. I've already done my slip stitch and turned on my last row, because my last row was counterclockwise, but I turned it and now I'm clockwise. Now read the directions. It should be pretty straightforward. So we're going to HDC in the first stitch, and this stitch we just did. Okay, And then we're going to skip 3 stitches, 1, 2, 3, and in the single crochet stitch we are going to work 5 double crochets. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And once again, we're going to do that little trick of doing a single crochet in the crossed shell loop. So there's that loop again, if you forgot what it looks like. And you're just going to do a single crochet. And you're going to repeat that all around your rows, all around the round. So the goal, what you're looking for at the end of this row, is an odd number of stitches. Now I put a number there for the large and for the small, but what you really, the most important takeaway, so don't freak out if you don't get the right numbers. Try to get the right numbers, and I checked the numbers and I believe they're correct. If you miss, but the thing you need to remember is you want to have odd numbers, because when you start working your 4 or 6 rows of the Trinity stitch, you're going to need that a multiple of 2 plus 3 stitches. So it needs to be an odd number no matter what you're doing. So I would follow that step. I would follow the directions on the row, and you're going to slip stitch when you get to the end. And I believe we end with, yeah, you're going to end with 5, let's see, you're going to end with 5 double crochets here, and then you're just going to slip stitch there. And then you're going to work your 4 or 6 rounds of the Trinity stitch. And you're going to get a really interesting edge. Because you're working it, because the Trinity stitch is working down, you're going to have little jagged points at the end, but they're not going to be super unwieldy or unpleasant. For the purposes of this cowl, I did not create a straight edge to finish the work, but there are ways for you to do that. If you want to talk about that some more, drop me a note here on the platform, YouTube of all things, or drop me an email. I am lexicom@Ravelry. And my email address is lexifile, that's LEXIPHILE @yahoo.com. Questions, comments, concerns, please send them there. I really hope you enjoy this cowl, and I'm so glad you took some time out of your schedule to be with me. It's just been really fun. I'd love to see pictures on Ravelry of your finished item. And again, join me next week. It'll be lots of fun, and we'll be doing something new. Have a wonderful day, and happy fibering.